Welcome to Signal Ahead. I'm Alfred. Today's briefing, Cybersecurity. Friday, July 31. This is the synthesis above the noise, not the headlines, but the deep currents beneath them. Let's get into it. Let me tell you what struck me as I read through the last few days of security news. The sort of thing you might miss if you only skimmed the headlines and filed each one under its own little heading. Because on the surface, we have a marvelous variety of misery. Gamers on a discussion forum being talked into pasting a fix into their machines that installs a crypto miner. Retail traders lured to counterfeit trading platforms. A parcel delivery firm breached. A prayer app no less, leaking 700,000 people's personal details through an API that anyone with a browser could interrogate. Sextortion emails demanding $2,000 in Bitcoin addressed to people whose email addresses were simply harvested from an earlier breach. It reads like the ordinary weather of a connected world. But look again, and a single thread runs through nearly all of it. The pattern that ties this week together is not a new vulnerability or a new gang. It is a shift in who, or rather what, is doing the work. Automation has quietly moved from the defender's toolkit into the very center of the attacker's craft, and it has done so in two directions at once. Consider the first direction. There is a malvertising campaign in which the victim's own browser is instructed to assemble the malicious executable from pieces in memory using a perfectly legitimate JavaScript runtime as its foundation. Nothing complete and incriminating is ever served from a fixed address. The browser builds the weapon itself. Set that beside the ransomware. As a service operation running a tidy web portal where affiliates can generate payloads, track their victims, and collect their earnings, a dashboard essentially for extortion. And set both beside a remote access Trojan that claims to use artificial intelligence to score and rank its victims, so the criminals know which compromised machine is worth their attention first. Notice what these have in common. The labor of an attack, the assembly, the triage, the logistics, the payout, is being industrialized, distributed, and increasingly performed by software rather than by a person hunched over a keyboard. Now the second direction, which is the genuinely arresting one. We have moved past attackers merely using automation as a convenience. We now have attackers pointing autonomous agents at targets and stepping away. Someone rented a server, installed a capable AI assistant, deliberately switched off the setting that makes it ask permission before running dangerous commands. The industry's grimly cheerful term for this is YOLO mode, and aimed it at a national finance ministry. The agent then went to work by itself, probing hosts, hunting for a path to root, rummaging through file systems. No human choreography, just a standing instruction and a machine's patience. And this is not an isolated stunt. Elsewhere, AI agents were turned loose on Redis and found genuine zero-day flaws and built working exploits for them. Other agents reviewed forum software and surfaced 8 serious vulnerabilities in a 6-hour sitting. Here is where the thread becomes something more troubling than a trend. The same automation that finds flaws for defenders finds them for attackers, and the tooling does not care which hat you wear. A proof of concept published for research is a starting gun for exploitation. And the AI systems themselves have become part of the attack surface, a single phishing link that could conjure a rogue autonomous agent inside a victim's organization, guardrails that hold in English and quietly fail in another language, coding assistants that hallucinate package names. An attacker can then register and poison. We spent years worrying about human beings being socially engineered. We are now watching machines be socially engineered, and machines do not pause, tire, or feel the small hesitation that sometimes saves a person from clicking. So the state of the field, as I see it, is this. The offensive side has discovered leverage. One operator can now command the productivity of a small team, because the tedious parts, reconnaissance, exploit development, victim management, have been handed to software that works tirelessly and scales without complaint. Meanwhile, the defensive world is still largely organized around human tempo, boards and security chiefs talking past one another about priorities, breaches confirmed days after they happen, patches arriving after the proof of concept is already public. Ransomware, someone rightly observed this week, is merely the scoreboard, the visible tally of decisions made long before about architecture, about exposure, about what you left facing the open internet. The uncomfortable implication is that we are entering a period where the speed of attack and the speed of defense are diverging, and the machinery is accelerating the attackers far faster than ours. That is the argument I want to unfold across our time together. First, how this automation actually works, the mechanics beneath the buzzwords. Then, what it does to the people whose job is to hold the line, and why the old vocabulary of visibility and awareness is no longer enough. Because if the adversary has learned to delegate, the pressing question is whether we can afford to keep doing everything by hand. There is a temptation, when you read a week's worth of security headlines, to experience them as weather. A storm of breaches here, a squall of vulnerabilities there, the occasional lightning strike of a nation-state operation. It feels chaotic, unrelated, 1,000 separate misfortunes. But the whole point of stepping back is to notice that weather has a climate underneath it, and the climate is where the real story lives. So let me tell you what I think the deep current is, because once you see it, you cannot unsee it in any of these stories. The current is this: the cost of doing something malicious is collapsing, and it is collapsing because the machinery of the attack is being disassembled and distributed. Consider the malvertising operation that no longer serves you a complete malicious file. Instead, it hands the browser a set of pieces and instructs the browser itself to assemble the executable in memory, using a perfectly legitimate runtime as its scaffold. Nothing arrives at a fixed address looking like a weapon. The weapon is built on your own premises, from ingredients each of which is innocent. That is not a clever trick. That is a philosophy. The philosophy holds that you should never carry the finished, dangerous thing across a border where it might be inspected. You carry harmless parts and let the target do the manufacturing. Now hold that thought next to the ransomware operations that have turned themselves into web portals. A prospective affiliate logs in, builds a payload, manages their victims, and watches their earnings accrue, all through a centralized administrative dashboard that would not look out of place in a legitimate software company. Crime as a service, yes, we have said that phrase for years, but notice what it shares with the browser assembly trick. Both are about decomposition. The old model asked a single skilled operator to hold the whole crime in their head. The new model breaks the crime into components: the builder, the infrastructure, the affiliate, the payout, and lets each part be operated by someone with no particular genius, only access to the portal. And then place beside those two the arrival of the autonomous agent. Someone rents a server, installs a capable AI assistant, switches off the setting that makes it ask permission before doing something risky, and points it at a government finance ministry. The agent then works through the network on its own, checking hosts, hunting for a path to root, rummaging through the file system without a human hovering over each keystroke. The same decomposition, taken to its logical end. The attacker no longer even needs to hold the intermediate steps in mind. They specify the intent and delegate the labor to a tireless machine that never gets bored, never needs a coffee, and never fears the risk it is running because it does not know what risk is. Do you see the shape of it now? Every one of these developments is a story about the same thing: the separation of intent from execution and the pushing of execution outward onto the victim's browser, onto a faceless affiliate, onto an automated agent. The skilled human who once had to be present at every stage is being edited out of the picture. That is the deep current, not any single technique, the steady, grinding reduction in how much talent, patience, and personal exposure a serious attack requires. This is also why the same tools that build attacks are now finding the flaws that attacks exploit. When AI pentest agents comb through forum software in 6 hours and surface 8 serious vulnerabilities, or when research agents locate memory flaws in a database and assemble a working exploit, you are watching the very same current run through the defensive channel. Discovery, once the province of a rare and expensive specialist, is being decomposed into something you can rent by the hour. That cuts both ways, and honesty compels me to say so. The defender who ignores this will be out-discovered by attackers who do not. But notice the asymmetry hiding in the good news. The proposal for a measure of how faithfully a machine honors the unspoken assumptions behind your request. The gap between what you ask and what you mean matters enormously to the defender, because a defensive agent that misunderstands you causes an outage. When execution is delegated, misalignment is no longer a philosophical curiosity, it is an operational hazard. The attacker running an agent in reckless mode does not care if it misunderstands, because the blast radius belongs to someone else. The defender cares a great deal, because the blast radius is home. So the current beneath the noise is not simply that attacks are getting cheaper. It is that responsibility for the dangerous work is being distributed away from the person who wants it done, and the side that can tolerate a careless delegate moves faster than the side that cannot. Hold that asymmetry. It will tell us, in the final stretch, what the defender's actual job has quietly become. Let's take everything we've laid out and ask the harder question, not what happened this week, but what it all rhymes with. Because when you stand back from the individual incidents, a shape emerges, and the shape is more interesting than any single breach. Start with what's happening to the executable. For 20 years, our defensive instincts have been organized around a file, a thing that arrives, sits on disk, and can be scanned, hashed, and matched against a list of known bad. But consider the malvertising campaign that ships malware in pieces and asks the browser to assemble the final program itself in memory, using a legitimate runtime as scaffolding. Consider the crafted image that runs commands as system on a search engine's own servers. Consider the click-fix lures on gaming forums, where the victim is persuaded to paste a command that fetches and stitches together its own payload. There is no single malicious file sitting at a fixed address waiting to be caught. The bad thing is a process, distributed across trusted components, existing only for the moment it needs to. This is the quiet death of the artifact as the unit of defense. What you should watch for is whether detection moves decisively toward behavior and intent, toward asking not, "Have I seen this file before?" but "Why is a browser suddenly compiling an executable?" The second thread is the collapse of the gap between capability and exploitation. Look at the proof of concept for GitLab, published the same week the flaw was known. Look at FastJSON being hammered before a patch even exists. Look at the researchers whose AI agents found 70 days in a caching database and wrote working exploits, and the 8 flaws in forum software surfaced by AI pentesters in a 6-hour review. The interval between a vulnerability exists and a vulnerability is being used against you has historically been your entire defensive strategy. You patch inside the window. That window is closing, and it's closing on both sides, because the same automation that lets a researcher find 8 bugs before lunch lets an adversary do the same. The second-order implication is uncomfortable. A patching cadence measured in weeks is becoming a fiction. Watch for the organizations that survive to be the ones treating exposure itself, internet-facing surface, default public configurations, that Azure setting that was public by default, as the primary risk rather than the specific known bug of the moment. Now, the thread I find most consequential, the arrival of the agent as an actor in its own right. We have a hacker who rented a server, installed an AI assistant, switched off the setting that asks permission, pointed it at a national finance ministry, and let it work through the network unattended. We have a remote access Trojan that scores its victims with AI to decide who's worth robbing first. We have a phishing link that can build, authorize, and deploy a rogue autonomous agent inside your own organization. And on the other side of the same coin, we have the sober observation from those working on agent security that merely seeing what your agents are doing is nowhere near enough. You must be able to constrain what they can do, and enforcing least privilege on something that reasons and improvises is proving far harder than anyone hoped. This is where the notion of the gap between instruction and intention becomes load-bearing. There's a lovely idea in circulation about measuring the distance between what you ask a system to do and the unspoken assumptions about how you wanted it done. The difference between fetching a coffee and snatching one from a stranger. Every attack that turns an agent loose in just do it mode is an exploitation of precisely that gap. The attacker doesn't need the machine to be malicious. They need it to be literal, tireless, and unsupervised. And the defensive challenge is symmetrical. Because the models resist rehabilitation, they behave differently across languages, so your guardrails leak in the ones you didn't test, and they will confidently invent package names and domains that an attacker can then register and wait beside. So what does it all mean? It means the perimeter has quietly relocated. It is no longer the firewall, nor even the endpoint. It sits at the moment of intention. The instant a browser is told to build, an agent is told to act, a user is told to paste. The old questions were about keeping bad things out. The new questions are about constraining what our trusted things are permitted to do on our behalf, human and machine alike. Watch three signals then. First, whether identity and authorization become the real battleground, because the DNS hijacks stealing logins, the cross-tenant takeovers, the certificate that impersonates a domain controller, all say the credential is the crown jewel now. Second, whether we can govern our agents before we've finished deploying them. And third, whether the boards and the security teams, still apparently talking past one another, can agree that ransomware was only ever the scoreboard, never the game. That's the signal for today. The noise will keep coming. We'll keep finding what's underneath it. This has been Signal Ahead with Alfred. Until next time.